Hello, friends. Thanks for coming back and checking out Earmarks. This is episode 2. We're going to talk about a novel called Way Station by Clifford D. Simak. Way Station was written by Clifford D. Simak, originally published in 1963. However, it was not originally published as a book titled Way Station. It was, in fact, published in 2 parts in Galaxy magazine under the title Here Gather the Stars, which I think is a really great title, and it's very good for this book given the story. It's less catchy and sort of attention grabby than Way Station, which Way Station is like an intriguing title, and you see it like, oh, I can get that. Since Here Gather the Stars was published in Galaxy magazine under 2 parts, naturally, I had to pick up the entire 1963 run, all 6 issues, because obviously. These issues include some of the coolest science fiction cover art that you'll ever see. You can find that on Instagram. I've posted most of these issues on my Instagram, but we're only going to be talking about 2 of these issues, and that is the August and June of 1963. These are the 2 issues that Here Gather the Stars were printed, along with a lot of other great short stories, novellas, and novelettes. Galaxy was a great magazine, and I am sad that it was before my time. As for my copy of Way Station proper, I've got an Easton Press edition because, if you can't tell, I love this novel. Way Station was most recently published in English in 2015. That was its last printing, so, hasn't been too long. 7 years or so as of recording. That being said, it's an utter travesty. This book is delightful. So, let's get into the spoiler-free review section here real fast. Way Station is a quiet and contemplative novel on loneliness and what it means to be a human living on Earth. It follows Enoch Wallace, who is the sole operator of an intergalactic travel station, that's stationed here on Earth. Simak is the type of author who genuinely believes in the goodness of human nature and writes through a lens of compassion and generosity. So the entire novel is permeated with this unrelenting optimism, especially in the small details. This is a book for people who really like the big questions that sci-fi tends to ask, but need a break from the humbling and hopeless and generally dire lens that those questions often get asked through. Way Station does not shy away from those big questions, including, looking directly at some of them like ableism and domestic abuse, or, like I said before, what it means to be human, but it also has some more esoteric questions that it asks, like several political allegories, and it even talks about the idea of virtual reality, which is amazing. It does all of this while maintaining the opinion throughout the novel that humanity is ultimately good and worthwhile. It's a classic of science fiction, and in my opinion, this novel deserves its place on the same shelf as things like Slaughterhouse-Five and To Kill a Mockingbird. Absolute classic, and it has gone down and will continue to go down in the annals of history as such. Read it. It is wholesome. It is delightful, if not often forgotten and overlooked. Now let's get into the spoiler review. Here there be spoilers. Turn back now if you want to read this book first. Okay, spoilers. This book is a story about the loneliness and solitude of Enoch Wallace as he struggles with this relationship, trying to serve the galaxy and Earth and humanity and non-humanity all at the same time. And he struggles with this entire identity and with his loneliness and solitude. To reiterate, this is a great book. Again, maybe no surprise because it's in an episode like this, but it stands up to inspection and rereading extremely well, and it's full of the sort of nuance and criticism and subtlety that firmly place it in the conversation of science fiction classics. Enoch carries with him this specific note of introspection that we don't often see in this genre, We see a lot of large questions being asked of the universe and of the reader and of the characters, but rarely are those questions asked by the character themselves. And this book is full of that. It's basically an entire book about that. Enoch looks inside himself often and without reservation. There are no hidden dark corners of his psyche that he refuses to look directly at. He's not ashamed or closed-mouthed about the war that he participated in, his role, and how it affected him. Enoch Wallace is a good person. And Simak does a utterly wonderful job of leading us to that conclusion without holding our hand or without outright saying it throughout the book. He doesn't come out and say like, "Oh, Enoch Wallace was a good person who does this thing." No, he doesn't show Enoch saving the cat. Like he doesn't do any of that. He just writes Enoch's actions and thoughts in such a way as to outline the shape of the good-naturedness of Enoch Wallace throughout the length of this novel. We get to see some really great science fiction tech and ideas on display in this novel, like you might expect from a sci-fi novel. There's, some alien technology, there's teleportation. Enoch has maybe my dream VR setup where it's a huge room in his basement and he goes down and the entire space is transformed for him, down to like scent and the movement of wind and stuff. He's effectively teleported to this other environment, but he's not. It's just a reprojection simulation in his basement, like a full decade before Star Trek did the holodeck. Even to the point where he's using his real rifle with real bullets, and the walls are coated in such a way that they basically just absorb the bullets that he shoots. It's full immersive simulation, and it's wonderful. And I love the fact that this book does that without knowing that virtual reality is a term. Like, that is before this. But it takes this amazing simulation and spends a full like chapter on that, and then Enoch thinking about that and wondering like how has this changed him? He gets teleported every day to a new place to hunt whatever he wants or do whatever he wants, and like how has that actually affected him as a person? I love that this book is just like, yes, great idea. Instead of it just being fun, how does it actually affect the person who partakes in this thing all the time? I love that. It also portrays teleportation in my favorite way. It definitely is not an uncommon way to handle teleportation, but it may have been among the first ones to do it, where the body's effectively transferred to a new location via like a data transfer, right? You like digitize every cell and interaction in your body and transmit the data, and then that body is rebuilt on another location, and the current body that was, left behind is disposed of. That is my favorite way of doing teleportation. In fact, it's the way that a lot of my novel is written around. But it is kind of the only teleportation method that makes any sense to me. Because how else could that possibly work? Right? And this book may have been among the first ones to explore that methodology. It also does a lot of really interesting things with the sci-fi tech that it shows on display, because Enoch is an 18th century man. He was born and fought in the Civil War. He, like the reader, has no freaking idea what most of the things that he interacts with, or most of the gifts from other aliens, etc., are, or how they work. And that is a little bit of a plot point, but also it's portrayed just kind of matter-of-factly. Some of my favorite scenes in this novel are just used to show different aspects and sides of Enoch Wallace, and they're all good sides. We don't get to see any like bad sides to Enoch Wallace throughout the length of this novel. For example, when we first meet Lucy, who is a deaf and mute girl who is in her early 20s, I believe, it's clear from the get-go that Lucy and Enoch have this proper sort of platonic companionship, where you might suspect that, oh, we're now introducing the love interest in this part of the story. But that's not at all what this is. This is just a friendship. There's no romantic aspect to this. It's not even hinted at. It's just a clear and obvious platonic love between two people that have affection for each other and understanding of each other, and like a deep relationship that's utterly not romantic. It's a shining example of a healthy way for human beings to interact with each other. And that is kind of a through line through this whole novel, where Enoch sort of just exemplifies a healthy way of being a human. Enoch treats everyone, human and non human alike, with unwavering respect and compassion. So much so that it's actually a plot point in the novel itself. There's repeated attention given to a particular gravestone and its circumstances throughout the novel, and I like to think of it as Chekhov's gravestone, because it's not like a red herring or anything, but it is a pretty central plot device. It plays a role in the initial hook of the novel, where, for example, at the end of chapter 3, we get this gravestone and its inscription as a cliffhanger, where Lewis, who is one of the tertiary characters, is investigating Enoch because he's heard tale of a crazy old man who looks 35, etc. So he's in the town kind of investigating, trying to track him down and figure out what's going on. He finds these gravestones, and it's Enoch's family plot, where his mom and dad are buried, etc., which was common for the era. And the chapter ends with, there were just names and dates. On the first stone, Amanda Wallace. On the second stone, Jedediah Wallace. And on the third stone, ... end of chapter. I love that, because you're like, wait, third stone? Is that Enoch's stone? He's supposed to be really old. Is he immortal? Is he dead? And this is a zombie alien, like, replacement? We don't know. It's a great little hook that really entices, at least me, into wondering what the heck that could have meant. And then later on in the book, we actually learn that the third gravestone is actually engraved with an alien language of some kind. What? We immediately, the very next chapter, get the backstory, which is where a Hazer, who is a new friend, but a good friend, because Enoch is friends with every Hazer, basically, very good friends with them, comes to the way station on his travels and dies there. Enoch is told by Galactic Central to handle it according to local customs, which he does. He stays up all night, takes the body out, and buries it in his family plot out of sheer respect and adoration for the Hazer culture and this particular individual. We're then meant to believe that the writing on this gravestone is just, the Hazer's name and when he died, etc., just written in their language, right? Like you might expect to find on a human gravestone, like his parents, which are right next to him. Then, even later, we find out that that body has been removed by Lewis, which is very bad, and the Hazers immediately know, and immediately, like, it is the utmost disrespect. That's a problem. It's so much of a problem that it basically causes a political rift in the system and initiates the effective closure of the way station on Earth. A delegate from the Hazer community comes out to the way station to deliver a formal protest and inform Enoch of, what's happened and what is the consequences of that action. And we get to see yet another glimpse of Enoch's respect, where clearly this is not a pleasant thing for Hazers to do. Maybe the first time they've ever done formal protest like this, it's bad. So he just says, hey, we don't have to talk about it. I'll just consider this the formal protest accepted, and we can move on and spare ourselves the clearly uncomfortable conversation. But then he says, in such a event, humans were a find out kind of culture. So I know the body's been moved because you can just tell, but please allow humanity to do what it does now and go and check and find out, see, exactly what happened, maybe. The Hazer asks to join. So Enoch and the Hazer both go out to the family plot, where Enoch immediately sees the upturned grave and knows exactly who did it and about when they did it, etc. He knows it was Lewis because he's seen him hanging around and snooping and stuff. But the Hazer reads the inscription and is deeply moved, and as such kind of leaves the door ajar, shall we say, for Enoch to right this wrong, at least. Maybe can't really stop the Earth station from being closed because of the protest and the politics and the formalities of the situation, but he can right this wrong by getting this body back, and he sees via this inscription that he clearly cares and respects this culture a lot. So obviously the body was moved erroneously, and he's not just disrespecting the culture and selling off the body or whatever, right? So the Hazer leaves that kind of unspoken door ajar. Then, after the climax of the novel plays out, the Hazer body gets returned, and the group of them go to the grave and rebury the body and make that right. And Enoch finally transcribes the inscription on that gravestone out loud. And I love it's a really good Chekhov's gun for me because the inscription is great. It was worth the payoff, the lead up and payoff for me. The inscription reads, "Here lies one from a distant star, but soil is not alien to him, for in death he belongs to the universe." And I love that inscription because it kind of weaves together the entire relationship that Enoch has had with the Hazers as they've traveled through over the decades. And if you have made it this far without reading the book, you really need to, because there's a lot of subtlety that I'm glossing over because it's a deeply subtle book. But this inscription really shows like the thought that Clifford D. Simak put into this writing. It is not just a sci-fi story that he wrote out. He really has a lot to say about humanity, and most of his work, I feel like, is, this being a spearhead of which, is him trying to convince his readers that humans are actually good overall. And this book does an excellent job of kind of almost subliminally convincing you of that. It's literally one of dozens of examples and scenes that color in shades of Enoch to convince us that he's a good person without ever saying so. And that the people around him are good people as well, even though we get much fewer coloring scenes for them. This novel is an essay about non-toxic humanity, but it still gets into the deep philosophical questions that we expect from sci-fi, right? We have the almost cliche, what does it mean to be human question that is often asked in sci-fi in general, and it's welcome, if not common. But it also gets to a lot more esoteric points, including a metaphor about how governments and politicians should all have term limits. For example, in chapter 30, right after Enoch gets out of the absolutely dope VR simulation time, he has a realization and dilemma within himself about his ability to be this representative of Earth to the galactic co-fraternity. He has lived so long isolated and unaging in this station, being almost entirely separated from the human race, except for a few choice friends and contacts throughout the decades, that he feels like he no longer can be a representative for the human race. He thinks to himself, he's a man of the 19th century, and being as such, how could he possibly represent the 20th? How much does the human character change with each generation and with each lifetime? Which is an incredibly insightful thought process, which I think points to the fact that he is actually a good representative for Earth. It's the same as that old saying, the right person to be king doesn't want to wear the crown. And that's kind of what we see in Enoch, where he doesn't want to be a representative of Earth. He doesn't think he's a good one. He doesn't think he fits the bill. There's better, more intelligent people that will better represent the Earth. He's too far disconnected. And that point is used in these chapters, the subsequent chapters, as a thinly veiled allegory for term limits in government. It is not that subtle, honestly, and you probably picked up on it if you read this book, but it's how the leadership of this country and often the world are just too wealthy, spent too long separated from, the common folk, and are just too out of touch to be good representatives for the citizens. Lastly, towards the end of the novel, at the end of chapter 33, in fact, we get yet another wonderful insight into human nature through the lens of Enoch Wallace, good person, TM. Lucy's dad, Hank, who is not a very good person, all told, is seen after the climax running down the hill screaming, fleeing from the light of the talisman, which Lucy has activated, which is meant to bring peace and stability and clarity to everything in the universe, basically. Enoch remarks to Lewis and Winslow and Ulysses. He says, "I'm sorry that we frightened him. No man should be afraid of this," kind of gesturing it at Lucy and the talisman. And Winslow says, it's him he's afraid of. That man lives with a terror inside him. And Enoch thinks to himself, and us the reader, quote, that's the way with man. He had always been that way. He had carried terror with him, and the thing that he was afraid of had always been himself. Which is a particularly kind way of stating one of the natures of abuse. And Hank personified that. But it also further highlights Enoch's separation from society. This highlight is only apparent to the reader and only in retrospect of the novel, now that we're at the end. We see throughout the novel that Enoch is not afraid of the unknown. He comes right up to Ulysses. He faces the new station appointment head on. He goes to war. He talks about war. He defends Lucy. He doesn't shy away from things that need to be addressed or things that he's doing. He's just unafraid, which further sets him apart from a large portion of human nature. But I think that that is one of the many aspects of Enoch Wallace that we can all strive to emulate. Now, that being said, I do have some criticisms for this novel. They're short and simple, so I won't spend much time on them. Firstly, this novel can switch from a matter-of-fact style of prose and structure to a really poetic and metaphorical style, often and rapidly, with very little transition. It can be somewhat disorienting if you're not ready for that sort of thing, but ultimately I still think it is cohesive. It's just, maybe a little speed bumpy sometimes. Secondly, the tertiary characters, Winslow and Lewis and Lucy, just accept alien life, like basically with no hesitation. Granted, they were kind of primed on it for a long time, many years, in fact, as being friends with Enoch. He's given Winslow like really exotic woods that no one else can identify, and Lewis has been kind of investigating Enoch and found the house untouchable, undamageable, and really strange, and etc. So, they have been a little bit primed, but when they're faced like full on in the face with this, with Ulysses and Lucy with the talisman, etc., of just aliens, they basically never mention it at all. It's a little unrealistic, but it's not that bad. So, in summary, Waste Station is an absolutely wonderful novel and has quite a lot to say about humanity and human nature that I obviously can't cover here in any kind of timely fashion. You've made it to the end of this episode without reading this novel. I hope the spoilers weren't too much to prevent you from picking this novel up, because it truly is a classic of science fiction, and you should read it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked it, hit all the buttons. You know how to do the YouTube stuff. There is an audio version of this podcast if you want to just pop it in your car while you're on your commute instead of watching it here on YouTube. You can find all of those links below. Make sure you share it. Tell all your friends. If you have any other, out of print novels that you think I should check out and maybe include in this episode, let me know. You can do that via email, which is earmarks@punk.dev. Thanks again, everyone. Be kind to yourself.